reasonable.
Yes. Mr. Ash, do you have a sense of humour? Do you have a sense of humour?
Well, I suppose. I enjoy the occasional joke, yes.
The occasional joke. Do you know when someone's being serious and when they're not?
Of course.
Do you know when someone's laughing at you?
Really, my lord, I don't know how my client's supposed to answer that sort of question.
Oh, be a little less oblique, Mr. Parsons.
So I'll try, my lord. The first time when Mrs. Robertson came at you with the bottle, you talked to her.
Yes.
And she put the bottle down and started laughing hysterically, you say. Did it not occur to you that she might be laughing at you?
Her behaviour was abnormal.
Yes, but that doesn't answer the question, Mr. Ash. Did it never occur to you at all that she might be laughing at you?
No.
Thank you. Do you drink?
Yes.
How much? How
An
often?
occasional light ale.
Yes. Are you married?
No.
Have you ever been married?
No.
No. In the summer of '72, did you have a girlfriend?
No. I couldn't.
You couldn't.
My mother. My mother was ill, dying.
I see. When did your mother die?
June the 12th, in the morning.
Yes. Had she been ill for long?
8 years. She had arthritis, then cancer.
Yes, so between your mother and your clients, it didn't leave you very much time for social activities.
Fishing on Sundays.
Fishing. As a member of a club?
You catch more by yourself.
Yes, I see. Would it be fair to say that following your mother's death, your main relationships were with your clients?
Oh, yes. I like my job.
Is there a risk of getting over-involved with them?
Yes.
Yes. Do you tend to become over-involved?
I do not. I watch that very carefully. We're trained not to become emotionally involved.
Yes. Now, you are personally responsible for 150 claimants.
About that.
How many home visits would you make in a year?
Oh, no idea.
Oh, well, let me try and help you. You have office work to do, holidays, courses to go on. If I said that for 250 days in the year, you managed to do an average of 3 home visits a day, making a total of 750, would I be erring on the side of generosity?
Oh, yes, you would.
Yes. Now, that means that each claimant is seen, on average, 3 times a year.
And it does work like that. Some people you never see, some people you never stop seeing.
Like Mrs. Robertson.
Mrs. Robertson was a very demanding claimant.
Yes, so much so that you had to see her no less than 14 times between January and September 1972. I mean, you've recorded them quite meticulously in your records. Your records are correct.
Of course my records are correct.
Yes. Now, did you visit Mrs. Robertson on June 16th, 1972, and on June 20th, 1972?
I can't remember individual dates if they're on the records.
No. They're not on the records. Did you visit her on these dates?
It's possible.
Possible, yes. Possible, because you made a number of visits to Mrs. Robertson which are not recorded.
Yes.
Yes. And Mrs. Robertson is not inefficient either and kept a record of her own. Now, why didn't you record these visits, Mr. Ash?
Because they were not office visits.
Not office visits? What sort of visits were they?
Welfare visits.
Her welfare or yours?
My lord.
Oh, yes, Mr. Frank. Ask questions, not innuendos, Mr. Parsons.
Yes, my lord. What was the purpose of these welfare visits?
I was arguing with her. I was concerned about the children. With her political activities, they were often on their own.
Yes, I mean, Mr. Rimmer...
Mr. Rimmer was away a good deal at that time.
Ah, yes, we are talking about June, July 72, aren't we? Just after your mother died.
Yes.
Did you talk to Mrs. Robertson about that?
It came up in conversation, yes.
It came up. Didn't it come up rather a lot one evening?
Yes. Yes, it did.
Well, there was something amusing about that particular evening?
Well, Mrs. Robertson gave me a lot of advice.
And that's amusing. That she actually might think herself in a position to give you advice?
Well, yes.
Well, what sort of advice did she give you?
Don't sit around in your mother's old house, sell it and buy a flat, that sort of thing.
Yes, do you find the fact that you were having that conversation extremely surprising?
No, I'd worked very hard on her.
Oh, did you?
If you can get
You had
inside...
worked very hard on her.
If you can get inside a person's aggression, you find they're quite different.
Do you? How different?
She did a lot for other people. Of course, she got no method, way she went about things. But she did set about things, got things moving, too. The DHSS isn't perfect. Sometimes we're badly understaffed. Mistakes are made. Well, she brought some of them to my attention. Similarly, with her claimants' union, they'd get hold of the wrong end of the stick, and I was able to point out where there was something...
You collaborated, didn't you?
Oh, no, not at all.
No?
No, I wouldn't use that word.
But what word would you use?
Well, I'd say there was some exchange of information.
Ah, well, during this exchange of information, didn't you feel that you become rather close?
No, not close. Not in that way. You don't understand.
I don't.
Sometimes she was a completely different person. If she could have stopped drinking and got away from people who expected it, who encouraged her to throw another shoe through another window, she could have been rehabilitated.
Rehabilitated? And you thought that you were the person to do this? Were you attracted to Mrs. Robertson?
Of course I wasn't.
Why, of course. She's a very attractive woman, isn't she?
I just didn't see her in that way.
Oh, yes, you keep saying in that way. What you meant was you weren't sexually attracted, didn't you?
I was not.
But I suggest you were attracted in some way, weren't you? Weren't you? I mean, you keep on talking about this exchange of information.
All right, I did get too involved, but in the case, she was a case. I'm sorry, Your Lordship.
Now, in August, you put your house on the market
Yes, I did.
and began looking for a flat.
Yes,
You told Mrs. Robertson about that.
possibly. Yes,
Well,
I did.
yes,
I did.
You were thinking of moving near.
I was thinking of moving into my area. I believe an officer should live in his area.
Yes, but at the end of July, Mr. Rimmer returned to the fold, didn't he? And affected your relationship with Mrs. Robertson.
Lord, really, in spite of his most strenuous efforts, my friend has failed to establish any kind of relationship between Mrs. Robertson and my client.
Yes, I think any kind is not right, Mr. Fry, but I cannot allow the ambiguity to pass, Mr. Parsons.
Your Lordship directs. Mr. Rimmer's return. Did this affect your professional relationship with Mrs. Robertson?
It affected her. She began to drink more, became more quarrelsome.
Oh, yes, her drinking. Let us consider your estimation of her drinking by looking at the events of the evening of September the 15th, 1972. Was she, lurching about in an incapable manner?
It wasn't like a film. She could take a lot of drink and not show it.
What do you mean there was no visible signs at all?
Well, I knew how much she'd had.
Well, how?
I see enough of it.
Yes, but I mean, she could have taken very little or nothing at all and still shown no signs of that either. I mean, as the drinker of the occasional light ale, you are hardly the best judge, are you? Now you say that after she'd been cautioned, she gave you a photograph.
Yes.
And you thought this could be taken away and used as evidence against her, didn't you? Did you find it rather extraordinary that she had done this?
I've explained that.
You've given an explanation, but the jury might think there's rather a more credible one. Now, she gave you the picture, and you quote her as saying, if you want evidence, you can find plenty of it, but you still can't stop my benefit. You see, what I suggest she was saying was that this whole cohabitation business is in such a muddle that you can always produce evidence. Look, here's some more, she said. But it doesn't matter what you produce, you still can't stop my benefit because it simply isn't true. I am not, and I never have been cohabiting.
It's not what she thinks, it's what we think. And she didn't say it like that. She said, you can't stop my benefit. That's what she said.
And you said to her that unless Rimmer went, you would file this report.
No, I did not. I said I was filing the report, and I asked her if there was anything she wanted to say.
Yes, you told her that evening about the new flat you decided to buy.
No, I did not.
But you can't remember showing her the prospectus? The estate agent's prospectus?
She picked that up.
But you put it down, presumably. prospectus down for her to see, did you not?
Came out with the other papers.
It came out with the other papers.
I was taking them out of my case. I followed procedure exactly. Nothing personal entered into it. I took out my papers preparatory to taking her statement. She saw the prospectus and picked it up. I can't live there, she said. Central heating makes my nose itch.
Had you asked her?
Of course I hadn't asked her. The whole thing was ridiculous. I kept trying to make her see what a serious position she was in, but she kept on laughing. Oh, no, she had had a lot to drink. Well, I said, I understand you have no statement to make and prepared to go. It was then that she brought out the picture. I don't know what she expected that to do. Well, I simply put it in my briefcase with my other papers. That quietened her. Just like that.
And then?
And then she went into the bedroom. I followed her.
Why?
To ask her if she wanted me to include a statement.
But you had already asked her that. Mr. Ash, why did you really go into the bedroom? You had completed all your official business, hadn't you? Cautioned her, told her you were going to file the report, asked her if she wished to make a statement. You put away your papers. What other business had you left to do? I suggest that you had only one purpose in your mind when you went into that bedroom. I also suggest that that purpose was even in your mind before you entered that flat. Whatever words you used or did not use, you used that report to put pressure on Mrs. Robertson to get rid of Rimmer so that you could pursue your own relationship, however you wish to describe that relationship. Now, when she went into the bedroom, you thought you succeeded, didn't you? You made advances, which, when resisted, turned into an attack.
That's not true.
Well, what
That's
is
not
true?
true?
What is true?
Well, she went... I just wanted to cover her up. I kept trying to make her feel some sense of shame.
Now, by cover her up, what do you mean? You want to fasten her dressing gown?
Yes. But I shouldn't have touched her. You see, she thought I was trying to...
Yes, I'm sure she did, Mr. Ash. Weren't you trying to?
No, I wasn't.
Come now, Mr. Ash, you had lost control.
No, but when she heard the flat door go, she flew at me, she attacked me. And then they were both at me, her and Rimmer.
They were both at you.
Yes.
They assaulted you. And yet, to my certain knowledge, you didn't report this matter to the police.
Oh, no. There are often arguments roused. We learn to deal with them ourselves.
Yes, by making reports.
That isn't fair.
What you did wasn't very fair. This is a very vehement report.
No, I reported on the situation.
No? Mentally unstable? Manic depressive? Isn't that vehement? Hysterical?
Well, it's what she is.
How do you know? Can you tell me the symptoms of a manic depressive psychosis?
Yes. Moods of elation and depression, which spring up from no apparent cause and persist in a way which normal moods do not.
Thank you.
Or people can swing from one to the other. They go up and down.
Thank you. You're repeating something you've written in a book, aren't you?
Oh, yes, I am.
Yes. You read a lot in psychiatry, do you?
Yes, I do.
Yes. Paperbacks?
Books.
Paperbacks?
Yes.
Yes, from which you pick out phrases you're not entitled to use.
I know what they mean.
What? You've had training in psychiatric medicine, have you?
Oh, no.
What sort of mood were you in the evening you wrote that report?
Mood? Oh, normal.
Normal? You weren't even slightly resentful? Slightly hurt? You were just normal?
Yes.
Mr. Ash, I suggest to you that you were humiliated when you wrote that report. Humiliated, bitter, and angry. And that you used that report as a weapon against Mrs. Robertson, to put it very simply, just to get your own back, didn't you?
No, I did not.
No,
I did not.
no
And if
further
anyone
questions,
is
my lord.
trying to get home...
Mr. Ash, from your reading, And from the courses that you've been sent on as part of your professional training, would you describe yourself as having a reasonable lay knowledge of psychiatry?
Yes, I think so.
Now, whether you were right or wrong in your use of psychiatric terminology, did you honestly believe these descriptions to be true when you wrote them?
Yes, I did.
Going back to the weekend, taking the weekend as a whole, can you remember anything about your state of mind?
Well, I was upset at first. I don't know. But when I went fishing on the Sunday, I remember feeling,
Yeah?
well, sort of relieved. You see, I had got too involved. That is true. But in her as a case, not as a person. That's what I'm trying to. I realized that I should have put that report in months ago, I suppose.
A lapse in duty which you decided to correct on the Monday.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Unless your lordship had any questions, that concludes the case for the defence.
No, you may leave the witness box, Mr. Ash. Mr. Parsons, Mr. Fry, we will now adjourn and consider the questions to be put to the jury.
All stand.
Hopefully. May it please your lordship, members of the jury, it was Mr. Ash's job, it was Mr. Ash's duty to report on Mrs. Robertson's character, on any matters that might affect her claim. It is the defence's case that he did his duty and no more than that. Now, you've seen Mrs. Robertson, you've heard her in the witness box. In the light of what you've seen and heard, dare you describe his report as inaccurate? There is no doubt that she drinks. And since her flat appears to have been a mini wine warehouse, do you see Big Annie settling for a modest glass or so a day? Was it not therefore reasonable of Mr. Ash to say that she was on the way to being an alcoholic? You've heard of Mrs. Robertson's temper, of her violent outbursts and changes of mood. Was it not therefore reasonable to say that she was mentally unstable? Remember that the official form A6M requires the visiting officer to note the mental stability of the claimant. As to the crucial cohabitation issue, I submit that since Rimmer and Mrs. Robertson had known each other for a period of years, since there appeared to be a common home, a common bedroom, possibly a common child, it was not only reasonable, it was Mr. Ash's duty to put in that report. Indeed, his only error lay in not filing it sooner. And when he did make that report, can there be any doubt as to his motivation? Oh, he had got too involved. He was honest enough to admit that, but was he filled with malice? Did he rush from Mrs. Robertson's flat and pen a vitriolic attack upon her? Members of the jury, he went fishing. He spent the weekend in his usual pursuits, and not until the Monday did he write the report it was his duty to write. Now, in answering the questions that have been agreed between his lordship, my learned friend, and myself, I ask you to consider that he wrote that report without malice, believing it to be true, in which case I ask you to find for the defendant.
Yes, please, your lordship. Members of the jury, I have no doubt in my mind about one aspect of this case, and I'm sure there's very little left in yours. That is that a relationship had built up between Mr. Ash and Mrs. Robertson. It may be a relationship that's very difficult to pinpoint, but a relationship there was. Yet suddenly, Mr. Ash produced a vehement, vindictive, and cruel report on Mrs. Robertson, saying that her mental health was in doubt, she was on the way to becoming an alcoholic, and that she was cohabiting with Mr. Rimmer. Now, it is very important in this case that we should be quite clear whether these statements, first of all, are true or not. Now, I would simply ask you this question. You have all watched Mrs. Robertson during this trial. Does she, for one moment, seem to you like an hysterical, manic, depressive sort of person? An extrovert, yes. A bit loud, perhaps, yes. Compassionate, yes. So compassionate, we have heard, for the work she does for other people with the Claimants' Union. We're on the way to becoming an alcoholic. Now, we only have Mr. Ash's word for that in his judgment. We've already seen that most of these bottles of wine in the flat were for redistribution, but even if they had have been for home consumption, we have no proof still of alcoholism. And finally, there is the thorny problem of cohabitation. Now, the Supplementary Benefits Handbook states that the 1966 Act does not define cohabitation. Now, I would suggest to you that Mr. Ashe also finds it difficult to define, especially since Mr. Rimmer was never there most of the time, and we subsequently discover that he has further lodgings in London. So why did Mr. Ashe fire this report? Well, sadly, it would seem that after the death of his mother, he wished to broaden his relationship with Mrs. Robertson. And when these advances were met with a rebuttal, it was he who became hysterical. It was he who became manic. And he filed a damaging and libelous report. Libelous because the report was written out of spite, because Mr. Ashe knew that these facts were not true. I therefore ask you to fine for my client and to award her substantial damages.
The law on this matter states that the burden of proving that the libel was published and is defamatory falls on the plaintiff. A statement is defamatory if it tends to bring the person mentioned in it into hatred, ridicule, or contempt. Now, it is up to you, but you may think that an assertion that a woman is on the way to becoming an alcoholic, is mentally unstable, is cohabiting with a man to whom she is not married, does tend to bring her into hatred, ridicule, or contempt. So, if you find that the content of Mr. Ashe's report was defamatory of Mrs. Robertson, then the burden falls on the defendant in two ways. The first line of defense is that the matter contained in the statement was true. So, has the defense convinced you on the balance of probabilities that, at the time, Mrs. Robertson was on the way to becoming an alcoholic, mentally unstable, cohabiting with the man, Edward Rimmer? If you decide the report was not true, then you must be extremely careful to bear in mind that you are in possession of certain information heard in this court which Mr. Ashe did not possess. For instance, he didn't know, or it hasn't been established that he knew, about Edward Rimmer's second corner in London. And this brings us to the second line of defense. If you are convinced that the matter contained in the report was not true, then you must ask yourselves if Mr. Ashe honestly thought the report was true and made in the course of his duty, but not out of spite, because if so, then it is covered by what is known as qualified privilege. Now, qualified privilege protects a person who makes a defamatory statement even though it transpires that that statement wasn't true. Qualified privilege can only be destroyed in its turn by the plaintiff proving malice. Members of the jury, will you now please retire and consider the agreed questions put to you by counsel?
Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached decisions on which you're all agreed?
Yes.
The first question: was the defendant's report likely to bring the plaintiff into hatred, ridicule, or contempt?
Yes.
The second question: were the statements contained in the report true or believed without malice to be true by the defendant?
Yes.
Then the third question does not apply. Thank you.
Lord, in accordance with the jury's decision, I ask that the judgment be recorded for my client. Mr. Ashe has suffered considerable professional embarrassment during the course of this action and has incurred substantial financial loss. In respect to this, I apply for costs on his behalf.
Join us next week when our cameras return to watch another leading case in the Crown Court.